Part 2 of Men with Hats. Let's look at the Kippah, the modern Kippah, or the Yarmulke. And actually, Kippah is a Hebrew word that literally means dome. Okay, I had an uncle that got bald-headed, because I'm bald-headed and I can't talk about him, but we used to kid him. We called him Chrome because when you get out in the sunshine, me and my cousin worked for him. We're like the same age, and we was always poking fun at him. It's like, man, that thing, top of your head shines like a piece of chrome out here. So we called him Chrome Dome. He took it well. I'm totally convinced that Kippah's got started to keep from getting a sunburn on top of that thing. He's like, I need something up there, honey. I keep getting a sunburn, because you will. Yeah. But really, Yarmulke is probably comes from, it's Yiddish, probably comes from an Arabic term that means reverence to the king. Okay, so it's really about reverence is really what this is about. It is a tradition. It's not a Torah command. It has as many different styles as it has wearers, and expressions. Really, the modern kippah, the modern skull cap, is a very recent adaptation of an ancient tradition up to the Middle Ages of everybody wearing a hat, of the idea of a religious man wearing a hat, which really dates all the way back to Talmudic times, even before Yeshua. Only a few years ago, to me is 40, okay. Only a few years ago, when we're talking about all the way back to the time of Yeshua, that's a few years ago, it was common when you asked somebody about that, the common saying was that the kippah represented the temple, because the temple had been destroyed. They didn't have a temple, and so it gave everybody their own personal little temple. It was just a picture of that. There's a lot of history behind it. Again, it's a very personal thing. There's so many stories. I got a bunch of notes here, but it's like there's so many stories. It really always come down to one thing. It was how to show reverence towards God, reverence or respect towards God. That's what it always was. And again, they come in all kinds of colors and situations. But recently, people have been teaching that it's related to the high priest wearing his turban, okay, and our priesthood. There we have to be very careful, because as we saw in part 1 just a bit ago, when you realize that head covering was to allow Aaron to bear the sins of Israel, and that the Aaronic priests are the only ones wearing that, and ultimately that high priesthood is a picture of Yeshua, particularly the high priest, okay, is a picture of Yeshua, a type of Messiah, then we have to be very careful if we're using that. Because it really can't do that, because then we would be imitating the high priest, and we can't do that because that's Yeshua. It is interesting in the Bible, when you look up head covering, really the references are to people in mourning. Look at this in 2 Samuel. It says, and David went up the ascent of the Mount of Olives. This is when Absalom was in rebellion and trying to take over the kingdom, and he's very distraught about the whole thing. David went up the ascent of the Mount of Olives, and he wept as he went. And his head was covered, and he walked barefoot. So he's been very humble and walking with his head covered. And all the people with him each covered their head, and they went up weeping. So they're in mourning. Judah in Jeremiah chapter 14 is in mourning here. It says, their nobles and the lads went for water. They came to the pits or to the wells. They find no water. Their vessels return empty. They're ashamed. They're confounded. And what do? They cover their heads, because the ground is cracked. It's dry. There's no rain. And the plowmen are, they're distraught, and they cover their heads. So again, it's a picture there of mourning. And so it was interesting that the earlier reasoning makes more sense, that it would be a picture of the temple not being there, and so you're in mourning for the temple being destroyed, and at the same time having a symbol of that. Mordecai returned to the king's gate, and Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman hasted to his house, mourning and having his head covered. So we see that. that whole idea of mourning and having head covered. So it does make sense to more so to apply it that way. There is a Talmudic tradition and teaching that actually prohibits prayer without your head covering. Without your head covered. Interestingly, the Bible teaches just the opposite. Now, there is a real issue to what a head covering even is, okay? So we got to be aware of that. And be aware that the kippah is a modern invention, very late. We know that as of the Middle Ages, they were still wearing big black hats, which some of the Orthodox still do. But Paul has some very interesting teaching on the subject. I want to look at it here. 1 Corinthians 11, he says, "Be imitators of me, just as I am also of Messiah." So he said, look at what I'm doing, but I'm doing what Messiah did. Okay? "Now I praise you because you remember me in everything and you hold firm to the traditions just as I pass them on to you." Now Paul, interestingly enough, he challenges on several occasions, he challenges them to find any rule that he's broken, including the traditions. And you never hear anybody saying that he broke them. I mean, he stood before the Sanhedrin just like, what did I do? You know, and nobody ever comes with a charge. This is important. I don't think he's teaching traditions. Just look what he says, though. This gets more interesting the more you look at it. It's just interesting. And again, keep in mind that the kippah is a modern invention. Okay, and so I have respect for those that wear it. It's a sign of reverence. It's not what I'm addressing here is for the rabbinic community to insist that it is a command. That's a problem. Just like if our reason for wearing it is to be a high priest, that's a problem. We have to be careful and we have to keep those lines. We have to know why we're doing it. You know, the idea is to know why you're doing what you're doing, right? Okay? And we're good to go then if we know what we're doing and know why we're doing it. Okay? So again, we're speaking against anybody's expression here. It's not at all what this is about. But it gets more and more interesting. So here he gets into this whole head covering thing and he says, I want you to know that the head of every man is Messiah. Okay? This is order. He's teaching order. And the head of the woman is the man. And the head of Messiah is God. Is that order? That's godly order, isn't it? That's order. You want shalom in the home? Keep that order. See, guys, we're real happy about this part where it says the head of the woman is the man. Like, we like that part. I'm good with that. The part where it says the head of the man is Messiah, and then the head of Messiah is God, it's like, now it's like, we'd like let's just leave that out. Let's just let me be the head of the woman. Let's leave it there. But that won't work, will it? People try that all the time, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Every man praying or prophesying with his head covered dishonors his head. So who's the man's head? He's not talking about his head. He's talking about his head. There's a couple of words here that you're going to find interesting that we understand headship and order from these ancient terms. Of course, the head of every man is Messiah. Okay? For surely a man ought not to cover his head, talking about when he's in prayer, since he is the image and glory of God. So Paul says that as men, that men shouldn't cover their head during prayer. But watch this. But every woman praying or prophesying with her head uncovered dishonors her head. Who's her head? It's her husband, her covering, who is honored, who is under Yeshua, who is under Yahovah Almighty, right? There's that order, okay? But if a woman has long hair, that's her glory, that's her covering. It came from God, okay? If you shave your head off and you look like a squirrel, you're going to have to put something over that, okay? But if you've got, you've got long hair, and that's what God gave it to you for. You have a covering, okay? You don't need to put anything else on. Now's when it really starts to get interesting. So I want you to look at specifically here at what he's saying. Paul's saying, imitate me, I'm imitating Messiah, right? So he's saying, I'm doing what Messiah did, right? Now remember who he is. He is by his own testimony, he is a Pharisee of Pharisees of the strictest sect, right? So he's doing what they were doing. He says, I'm, okay? Or he's, he said, I'm doing what Messiah is doing. I am. He didn't say I was. When he says that, he said, I am a Pharisee of Pharisees, not I was one. So this guy is what we would think of as an ultra-Orthodox Jew of the first century, right? Yes. And he's saying that his walk is a picture of Messiah's walk, right? Yes. So he's imitating Messiah Yeshua and encouraging those he's teaching, his disciples, to do the same thing. Do it just like I'm doing it. Okay, because that's how Yeshua did it, right? He said there, hold firm to the traditions just like I passed them on to you. But if any man seems contentious about these things, we have no such custom. They don't have a custom of the head covering? He's telling men not to wear a head covering? So it brings up in my mind, look at what he's saying. Imitate me. I'm imitating Messiah. Hold firm to these traditions that I'm passing on. He just got through teaching. These are the same verses. So the man shouldn't pray with a head covering. Yet we've got an ancient tradition for men, a Talmudic tradition. It goes way back. For men have to pray with a head covering. I'm starting to wonder who wrote this stuff. We've always complained that it was the Pharisees and all. I don't think so. Because Paul is a Pharisee. So who is it that's writing this Talmudic literature? I'm really starting. I don't know the answer. But think about it. According to this witness, who by his own testimony is a Pharisee of Pharisees, he doesn't reject Phariseeism at all. He doesn't. But him and Yeshua have a problem with traditions, right? And he's saying, as for us, we don't really have a custom like that. He's not speaking for or against the custom. He just said, we don't have that rule, okay? By the way, the Bible doesn't have it as a rule, and that's what I'm pointing out. Talmud has it as a rule, and there's the problem. There's a problem when you take it as a rule that you have to do it versus as an expression of what? Respect, yeah. It's an expression of respect. Okay. So it's two different things, and that's really what I want you to see. Is that making sense? Amen. Amen. I just thought that was very interesting. So essentially he's saying, if we start at the end and back up there, first of all, it's not a point of contention. He says, not a big deal. Okay? But he's also saying that Messiah Yeshua apparently did not do this. And I just find that interesting. Just a whole picture of how we've pictured first century Orthodox Judaism might be a little skewed if we look carefully here. Amen?